Oklahoma inmate has died after a botched execution, then a second execution stayed. Clayton Darrell Lockett suffered a blown vein, then a heart attack during his execution Tuesday night in McAlester, Oklahoma.
Once for state law. God have mercy on your soul.
Around the world, criminals sentenced to death row face execution in the most varied, brutal, and horrifying of ways, from the relatively fast, yet mentally tortuous, to the slow and physically agonizing. Let's take a look at some of these monstrous methods of putting those death row inmates to death. The first and most well-known form of execution is the electric chair. This is a method of capital punishment that has been used in the United States since the late 19th century. First introduced as a more humane alternative to hanging, the electric chair has become infamous for its brutality and horrifying nature. Its history, process, and psychological impact reveal why it remains one of the most feared methods of execution. The electric chair was developed in the 1880s as part of a campaign to find a more efficient and supposedly less painful way to execute condemned prisoners. Its invention is credited to Alfred Southwick, a dentist who collaborated with Thomas Edison and other electrical pioneers. The first use of the electric chair occurred in 1890 in Auburn, New York, when William Kemmler, convicted of murdering his wife, became the first person executed by this method.
William Kemmler became the first person to be executed using an electric chair.
Despite claims of its humaneness, Kemmler's execution was far from smooth. It required 2 jolts of electricity, and witnesses were horrified by the spectacle of his body convulsing and burning. Since then, the electric chair became the primary method of execution in many states throughout the 20th century. Execution by electric chair involves strapping the condemned prisoner to a specially designed chair equipped with electrodes. One electrode is placed on the head, typically over a shaved scalp, and the other on the leg.
Before the execution, it is necessary to ensure that the prisoner is naked, that is, to shave off all the hair on the body, including hair, leg hair, chest hair, etc. This is done to improve the conductivity and prevent the prisoner from being burned by the heat generated during the conduction process.
The prisoner is restrained with leather straps to prevent movement during the procedure. A saline-soaked sponge is often used to improve conductivity and reduce burns, although errors in preparation can lead to catastrophic results. When the execution begins, an initial high-voltage current of 2,000 to 2,500 volts is sent through the body to cause immediate unconsciousness and stop any brain activity. This is followed by a lower voltage current to ensure the heart stops. However, the process is not always effective. In many cases, the prisoner remains conscious for part of the execution or experiences significant pain, as evidenced by screaming, convulsing, or visible burns on the body. The horror of the electric chair lies in both its physical and psychological elements. Witnesses to executions have described the smell of burning flesh, the sight of smoke rising from the prisoner's head, and the sound of the body convulsing against restraints. These horrifying details make the electric chair one of the most gruesome methods of execution. There have been cases where the wrong person has been killed by the electric chair, though.
The USA once executed a 14-year-old boy. George Steiny was accused of taking 2 girls' lives. He was too small to sit on the electric chair, so had to sit on top of a Bible.
It's just another example of the cruelty of this execution method. For the condemned, the anticipation of such a death is psychologically torturous. Knowing that one's life will end in such a violent and painful manner makes the fear and anxiety leading up to execution even worse. The unpredictability of the process, where errors can prolong suffering, adds to the terror. The electric chair has been widely criticized for its cruelty and inhumanity. Numerous botched executions have highlighted its failings, with prisoners enduring prolonged deaths as the electricity failed to work as intended. Critics argue that such executions violate the 8th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. However, it is still controversially a method of killing prisoners in several states. A more commonly used method of execution in the United States and many other countries for carrying out capital punishment.
33 states in the US currently authorize executions using lethal injection.
It was introduced as a supposedly more humane alternative to methods like hanging, electrocution, and the gas chamber. However, beneath its clinical facade, lethal injection carries its own horrifying realities that have sparked widespread ethical and legal debates. Lethal injection typically involves administering a combination of drugs. These include a sedative, a paralytic agent, and a drug to stop the heart. Together, these drugs are intended to render the prisoner unconscious, paralyze their muscles, and induce cardiac arrest. The process begins with restraining the prisoner on a gurney. IV lines are inserted into their veins, often requiring significant effort if the individual has a history of intravenous drug use or poor vein access. Once the injections start, the sedative is meant to put the prisoner to sleep. The paralytic prevents any outward signs of distress, and the potassium chloride disrupts the heart's electrical signals, leading to death.
The chest becomes immobile and can no longer draw breath, leading to respiratory arrest.
But while this sequence may sound straightforward, the reality is far more complex and disturbing. One of the most horrifying aspects of lethal injection is the high rate of botched executions. Studies have shown that lethal injection has one of the highest failure rates among execution methods. When the drugs are not administered properly, or when the prisoner's body reacts unpredictably, the process can become a drawn-out ordeal.
But after 2 hours, doctors couldn't find a suitable vein. Then Governor Ted Strickland stopped the execution, just postponing it. That's when the legal battle began.
For example, if the sedative fails to fully render the prisoner unconscious, they may experience excruciating pain as the potassium chloride courses through their veins, described by some as similar to being set on fire from the inside. However, because the paralytic agent prevents them from moving or speaking, the prisoner cannot signal their agony, creating a grim facade of peace. High-profile botched executions, such as those of Clayton Lockett in 2014 and Joseph Wood in the same year, have revealed how lethal injection can result in prolonged suffering. Lockett writhed and attempted to speak for 43 minutes before dying of a heart attack, while Wood gasped for air for nearly 2 hours as a malfunction in the drug protocol caused his death to be agonizingly slow.
An Oklahoma inmate has died after a botched execution, then a second execution stayed. Clayton Darrell Lockett suffered a blown vein, then a heart attack during his execution Tuesday night in McAlester, Oklahoma. Then the execution of Charles Warner has been stayed for 14 days.
Lethal injection has been criticized for its veneer of humanity, which some argue serves to desensitize society to the act of killing. The use of medical personnel and equipment blurs the line between medicine, which is intended to preserve life, and execution, which ends it. Many medical professionals refuse to participate, leaving the procedure to untrained personnel, increasing the risk of error. Though lethal injection was introduced as a humane alternative to older execution methods, its horrifying realities tell a different story. From botched executions that inflict unimaginable suffering to the psychological torment it imposes on prisoners, lethal injection remains a deeply controversial and troubling method of capital punishment. Its sanitized appearance belies the brutality inherent in ending a human life, fueling ongoing debates about its place in modern justice systems. But there are far more brutal methods of killing people, such as mass executions, where multiple people are killed at once. The mass executions of prisoners in Iran during the late 1980s, particularly in 1988, represent one of the darkest chapters in modern Iranian history.
His parents spent years looking for answers.
They are his mother and father, and to comfort them, I would say yes. I also hope he is alive.
Jabbar was one of at least 5,000 people, mainly young political activists, who were forcibly disappeared or executed in 1988, according to Amnesty.
These executions were carried out under the orders of the Iranian regime and targeted thousands of political prisoners, primarily members of opposition groups. What makes these mass executions so horrifying is the sheer scale, the secretive nature of the killings, and the cruelty involved. The mass executions took place in the summer of 1988, following the end of the Iran-Iraq War. Iran's supreme leader at the time, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, issued a decree authorizing the extermination of political prisoners who were seen as a threat to the Islamic Republic.
In 1988, the group staged an armed incursion in Iran. In the following weeks, Amnesty says the regime tried to wipe out the opposition through mass executions of political prisoners.
Thousands of political prisoners, many of whom had already served their sentences or were awaiting trials, were suddenly subjected to secretive death commissions. These commissions were tasked with interrogating prisoners and determining whether they were loyal to the Islamic Republic. Those who failed to demonstrate their loyalty were executed. It is estimated that between 4,500 and 5,000 people were executed over a few months, though some human rights organizations believe the actual number could be much higher. Their bodies were often buried in unmarked mass graves, leaving families without knowledge of their loved ones' final resting places.
These executions, which took place in at least 32 cities across the country, were allegedly ordered by Iranian Islamic revolutionary Ayatollah Khomeini and carried out by Iranian officials.
One of the most horrifying aspects of these mass executions was the process by which they were carried out. Prisoners were brought before death commissions, composed of judges, intelligence officials, and clerics, who asked a series of questions about their political affiliations and beliefs. These hearings lasted only minutes, and there was no opportunity for defense or legal representation. After sentencing, prisoners were led to execution sites within the prisons. There was no transparency, and families were kept in the dark about the fate of their loved ones. Many only learned of the executions months later, often through anonymous notices or rumors. The bodies were buried secretly in mass graves, erasing the identities of the dead and denying families the opportunity for closure.
Tehran has called the perpetrators heroes who were defending the nation from invasion. Amnesty says the government has continued a policy of cover-up and misinformation, destroying mass graves and refusing to reveal the whereabouts of those killed or missing.
The horror of these executions lies not only in their brutality, but also in their systematic nature. The use of religious decrees to justify the killings, the cold efficiency of the death commissions, and the secrecy surrounding the process all contributed to an atmosphere of terror. Despite the severity of these atrocities, the international response at the time was muted. It was only in later years, through the testimonies of survivors and the work of human rights organizations, that the full extent of the massacres became known. The lack of accountability for these crimes continues to haunt Iran and fuels ongoing demands for justice from families of the victims and international activists. For something more primitive, though, we have to turn to execution by stoning.
Execution by stoning is a common occurrence in Islamic countries that are bound by Sharia laws.
Stoning, or lapidation, is one of the oldest forms of capital punishment, dating back to ancient civilizations. It has been used in various cultures and religions as a means of punishing individuals accused of crimes such as adultery, blasphemy, or apostasy. While stoning is rarely practiced in the modern world, it remains one of the most brutal and horrifying methods of execution, characterized by its slow, painful nature and its communal aspect, which often involves the participation of bystanders. Stoning is typically carried out by placing the condemned person in a public location, often in a pit or restrained to prevent escape. A crowd of participants then pelts the individual with stones until they succumb to their injuries. The stones are deliberately chosen to be neither too large to cause instant death nor too small to avoid causing significant harm. This ensures that the execution is prolonged and excruciating. In some cases, stoning involves partial burial. The communal aspect is significant, as it is intended to distribute the responsibility for the death among a group, often making it a symbolic act of societal or religious condemnation. Stoning has roots in ancient legal codes and religious texts. In some interpretations of Islamic Sharia law, stoning is prescribed as a punishment for adultery, though its application varies widely between Islamic nations. However, the practice has largely been abandoned or outlawed in most modern societies. Nowadays, stoning is rarely practiced, but it has been reported in some countries where strict interpretations of Sharia law are enforced. These cases often involve accusations of moral or sexual issues, targeting mainly women.
Under some versions of the Sharia law, this method of execution is often used as punishment in cases of adultery committed by a married person. Similarly, under the Taliban rule in Afghanistan,
stoning is widely regarded as one of the most inhumane methods of execution due to the extreme physical and psychological suffering it inflicts. Unlike methods designed to cause a quick death, stoning prolongs pain and suffering, often taking minutes or even hours for the condemned to die. The injuries caused by stones broken bones, deep lacerations, and severe internal damage are excruciating. Victims often face humiliation and degradation as they are executed in front of crowds, including members of their community. It's undeniably a horrific way to die, no matter what their crime or supposed crime may be. So now, it's over to you. Which of these execution methods sounds the worst and most brutal to you? We love to hear from you, so be sure to leave your thoughts and opinions in the comments section down below. If you haven't already, please give this video a like and a subscribe. And as always, thanks for watching.